I let my hair roam free today, unbridled. I look a little crazy, but I also kind of like it. It's a whole new me. Just like Marilyn Monroe, it's a creation, it's an illusion, it's an alter ego. That was a good segue. So, guys, last night I watched the new Netflix biopic on Marilyn Monroe called Blonde. You might have heard of it, you might have seen it. I'm still thinking about it today, this morning, so I thought I should make a video and see what other people think, if other people have seen it, and share my 2 cents on it. So, first off, the movie is heavy. Like emotionally, it's a heavy movie. It's emotionally draining, it's depressing, but in that sense it succeeded, I think, as a film in doing what it was, I think, trying to do, which is really show the tragedy of Marilyn Monroe's life. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people know that she had a very tragic life from start to finish, literally the whole way through. Despite her success, despite sort of the legend she became and the symbol she became, her life from start to finish was filled with a lot of sadness and tragedy. But I think a lot of people don't know that, and they just know the symbolism and the sex symbol, the image, the career, the Hollywood sort of glamour thing. And so I think the movie was trying to really show people, like, nah, this is a cautionary tale. This is not supposed to be a source of inspiration, or at least that's how I've always seen her story. I've always gotten a little weirded out by people glamorizing her, because to me that means, or glorifying her, because I think that means people are missing the point of her story and what we should be taking away from it, which, by the way, is how I feel about a lot of people. That's how I feel about Michael Jackson. That's how I feel about Whitney Houston, that we should be looking at the deeper meaning of these like fallen sort of titans from their fall from grace and their demise, and how they got there, and how the world helped destroy them, but also they were always broken elements to their story that just kind of became amplified, which the movie really does try to like pound into the viewer. It's a very long movie. It's like almost 3 hours. I don't know about you. Maybe I'm just not enough of a cinephile. Cinephile, is that the right word? But 3 hours is a long time for me. There were moments where I caught myself fast forwarding through the pieces that are, through the scenes that are sort of setting up the next scene, like transitional scenes where I wouldn't miss anything by missing those 20 seconds. So the fact that I had that instinct makes me think, well, maybe it wasn't that great of a movie then, because if you're fast forwarding through parts, that's not a good sign. But on the other hand, it's a very beautifully created artistic piece. Like, there are scenes where the lighting is so beautiful and they manage to capture, there's a very special light in Southern California, natural light, that I remember noticing when I lived in LA and thinking, I've never seen light like this that penetrates the trees and the leaves. It's very hard to explain unless you've seen it. I've never seen it anywhere else, but there's a very special light, literally sunlight. And they managed to capture that in the movie, and also just capturing that era, the 50s, on screen, and just certain details, like the sensory experience of the movie is really, really well done. For example, there's a scene where there's a fire and there's cinders in the air, like glistening, and I was watching this movie on my laptop, so it's not like I had surround sound, it's not like I'm in a theater. I'm sure in a theater it's even more sort of powerful and effective, but the audio, like the sound effect of the cinders and the distance between them, far and close up, made me feel like I was there, like I was present, and I'm sort of engrossed in it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this isn't a movie I would want to see again, so that would make me think, okay, I must have not loved it, because, okay, I saw it once, I don't need to see it again. But on the other hand, I really appreciated the beauty of the film, and I think it captured the essence of her story very well, and the sadness and the chagrin. So I say this because the reviews have been very mixed to the movie, and I understand why, because I guess I left feeling unsure as well. Like I'm not like it's my favorite movie, I need to tell everybody about it, but I'm also glad I saw it and it was worth seeing, and I think it's worth seeing at least once for anybody who can appreciate, if nothing else, who can appreciate film. One thing that isn't polarizing at all is the performance by the actress who plays Marilyn Monroe. She was fantastic and alluring, and she totally nailed that Marilyn Monroe was kind of like a caricature at the end of the day, like a character, but yet she doesn't do it in a way that's satirical or laughing at her. It's very, it feels very human. It's a very human portrayal of a character that's actually difficult in the end to portray, right? Because how do you portray somebody who was living vicariously through this created alter ego without making it lifeless? And yet she really managed to, I mean, I think she did an amazing job, actually. The more I'm like vocalizing this, I'm realizing to capture the fragility and the emotional sort of almost childlikeness of Marilyn Monroe in a way that makes you sympathize with her. She did a fantastic job, and she really nailed the persona, I think, of Marilyn Monroe. What I also really think is interesting is that the woman who plays her is of Cuban descent, right? So she's of Spanish origins. Spanish people are kind of ethnically ambiguous, right? So this arguably ethnically ambiguous woman playing Marilyn Monroe and really capturing the physicality of Marilyn Monroe, it made me think about the physical identity of Marilyn Monroe, meaning the bleach blonde hair, the light skin color. It's like she was kind of the epitome of what American Beauty was considered at that time, which is a very white image. And yet if you look at Marilyn Monroe's facial features, they look a lot like the facial features of the actress who played her, in that they're actually, skin color and hair aside, her facial features themselves are ambiguous. Like Marilyn Monroe herself looked like she could have been Mediterranean, Latin. I guess what I'm trying to say is the image of Marilyn Monroe was undeniably that of a white woman and white beauty by American Beauty standards of the 50s. And yet there's something about her face that to me feels universal, which probably helps explain the allure of Marilyn Monroe during her heyday, that she morphed into the stereotypical image of beauty at that time, kind of like how I would say the most modern version I can think of for us would be like Pamela Anderson, how Pamela Anderson captured that blonde bombshell image, or like Anna Nicole Smith in her prime, or Claudia Schiffer. But there's something about Marilyn's bone structure and facial features that also I can imagine non-white audiences being sort of drawn to her as well, and seeing something in her that is appealing to them despite that. I don't know if that's making sense. I don't know if that's me and my delusion, but that would help explain just the magnitude of how alluring she was to the masses. I found out that this movie has been in the works for like a decade, and I think it actually worked in the favor of those behind the film, the producers, director, actors, the writers. It worked in their favor that the movie came out when it did, because I think a lot more people in the past, I guess, 5 years or so would now see this movie through the lens of the Me Too movement, specifically the outrage and the unraveling of the Harvey Weinstein situation, the Bill Cosby, like all these Hollywood moguls who fell from grace and who had all these, casting couch stuff unveiled, seeing it through the lens of having read Rose McGowan's book Brave, which I made a separate video about. I had all of that in the back of my mind as I was watching this movie, and I thought, if that stuff happens now, I can only imagine how it was back then in the 50s, in the golden era of Hollywood, right? And the movie obviously goes into this, that she was kind of shuffled around man to man. And it was eerie to me how much reminded me of Rose McGowan's story and her book Brave, this idea of a woman being born into instability and a very unstable, precarious childhood of abuse, and then that her whole adult life she's kind of shuffled from man to man throughout this industry that is significantly, especially then, built on the exploitation of women. And just the idea of like chicken or the egg, right? It's like, is somebody who comes from such a broken home attracted to that world, or is that world attracted to her, right? Like, does that world find vulnerable women like this, or is it that these vulnerable women kind of throw themselves where that cycle will repeat? And I think the answer is probably both. I think she found validation through this kind of industry of Hollywood, and Hollywood found her easy to work with, aka she would submit to these men with these power complexes. The movie goes into her marriage to Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player, and that was really interesting. How he was obviously her alleged affair with JFK, and how these men were attracted to this vixen, sex symbol image of hers, and yet they also wanted to be in control of it. Joe DiMaggio in particular apparently did not do well with how commodified she was. So that's interesting to me. Like, what you're signing up for. It's Marilyn Monroe, but yet now that you're in a relationship with her, you feel like that should only be for you. Like, that entitlement is really interesting to me, and the hypocrisy of that. You can see a pattern developing, and you kind of like want to shake somebody and be like, wake up. At the same time, we're responsible and accountable for our own lives. And of course, that's easier to say today because I think we're so much more educated about human psychology and, all these concepts that I talk about on this channel all the time, gaslighting and love bombing and narcissism. This is a thing that's like such a huge topic on YouTube, social media in general. So I realized that this was a time when people didn't necessarily have the same resources. There wasn't the same education about psychology, and, that Valium and like antidepressants are not a long-term solution for people with mental health struggles. So yeah, I guess my takeaway was both feeling compassion and also frustration at the idea of how somebody can accomplish so much and yet feel totally helpless and not realize the power they have to shift their destiny in other ways, right? Like, to me, it seems so much easier to have a happy, healthy life than to be Marilyn Monroe status, to reach that level of fame, success, wealth, and so on, and to endure. Like, obviously she didn't know this would happen, but all these decades later that she's still this huge symbol. It's so interesting to me how people can have blinders on and not realize what power they have in their lives otherwise. What are your thoughts on this movie, if you've seen it, or otherwise just on the tragic tale of Marilyn Monroe?